Hello. Our story begins inside the meditation chambers of Jedi Master Sifo-Dyas. The year was 36 BBY. The Republic was slowly collapsing. Sifo and his friend, Dooku, were seeing their writings on the wall. Before ever having visions about a great crack in the foundation of the government and a galactic-spanning war, Sifo-Dyas remained one of the more questionable members of the High Council. He hadn't been discovered of his controversial recruitment tactics, and he certainly had one of the wilder imaginations inside the Order. It was in the middle of the night, and he was meditating, as he always did. Instead of being drawn into a fight to save the universe between the Jedi and the forces of evil, he foresaw much worse. There were no wars to be shared. There was only destruction. The Sith had returned. They managed to survive their millennium in hiding, and brought with them a master plan that would destroy the Jedi Order and everything with it. A plant within the very structure of the temple that would see a young Jedi become a Sith Lord and rule the galaxy. Sifo's vision saw entire star systems destroyed, people massacred, and the Republic crumbling under an autocratic rule. The monarch was a Sith Lord in disguise, and the Jedi were destroyed in one go. Sifo-Dyas meditated off of the ground before dropping and searching around himself. He couldn't believe what he saw. His heart thumped faster inside of his chest, and he placed his hand over it, calming himself. He slowly pushed himself off the ground and opened the blinds to look out into the ambient Coruscant skyline. The 66-year-old Jedi Master reflected on what he saw before grabbing a holopad and recording all of his thoughts. He would need to confront his friend Dooku about this tomorrow. Sifo, once he finished writing everything out, couldn't focus. His mind was left devastated by what he saw. His hands tensed around his wrists, and he pulled silver hairs away from his face. Sifo forced his eyes shut and placed himself down on his cot, trying with all of his heart to forget the vision and leave it for the morning. Whenever he eventually fell asleep, he'd be plagued with more variations of the visions. Some of them worse, others a little more tame, but the result always being the same: pain. Morning eventually fell on the Jedi Temple, and Sifo-Dyas stepped out of his chamber to a lively corridor. His eyes were heavy bags under them, and his hands were wrapped around his arms, hidden within his cloaks. He drifted as a shadow throughout the halls, until he eventually found the lift that took him to the top of the temple, to a central tower. Inside, he found Master Yaddle, an elder member within the council's ranks. There weren't any meetings scheduled for the early block, but Sifo knew that he might find someone inside the room. He bowed to her, and she reciprocated from her seat. Yaddle immediately sensed his worries, and she asked him if he was alright. Sifo-Dyas moved over to his seat, rolling his shoulders and stretching out his back. As he sat down and looked at her, he pursed his lips and told her that he had a vision, but he hadn't figured out what he should make of it. Sifo admitted that Yoda always preached about minding the future and considering it, but still he wasn't sure if this type of vision should be taken seriously or not. Yaddle clasped her hands, knowing who Master Sifo-Dyas was. He was one of the great minds of the Jedi Order, definitely an imaginative soul, but his visions of the future were frequently correct. He was someone, unlike many others, that could see things beyond just a few days into a few years. Knowing this, she told Sifo to speak about it, and they could discuss it before ever being joined by one of their peers. So he nodded his head, expressing that a Jedi would be brought into their order at an older age, and they would be trained as one of them. Though there would be a fall from grace. Whether the individual got along with the Jedi or not, Sifo was unsure, but they turned against the Order. They would be the one to reimagine the Sith Empire, creating planet-destroying weapons and bringing mass death to the galaxy. Sifo-Dyas was unsure if this individual was born a Sith and planted into the Jedi Order by them, or if he was just destined to become this. But there was something else, something that Sifo-Dyas worried most about. Yaddle's face was worn with concern. She could hear in her peer's voice how much he was bothered by this. He expressed that he feared that this was the Chosen One. The other Master Jedi didn't know how this could be. If the prophecy claimed that the Chosen One was meant to bring balance, then why would he or she destroy it? Sifo paused for a moment, understanding that sentiment, before telling Master Yaddle that the Sith had their own prophecy, a Sithari. This individual, the one he could feel in these visions, was very powerful. Sifo believed that the Chosen One and Sithari were synonymous, that they could very well be the same person. If the influence was present, then surely the individual could be swayed. Yaddle took a deep breath, trying not to judge her peer, but it was difficult. She asked if this meant that Sifo-Dyas believed the Sith had returned and were simply living amongst them. The Jedi Master nodded shakily. He didn't want to suggest it, because it would be madness, but it wasn't exactly not plausible. Yaddle tensed up a little bit. She wanted an explanation. Sifo tilted his head from side to side, shrugging his shoulders. If the Republic was crumbling, which it was, is it not possible that the influence of the dark side could be present? It had been 1,000 years since the Jedi last saw a Sith, and Darth Bane was the apparent end of the lineage. But is there a scenario where Bane learned from the failures of those before him? From what Yoda recalls, he was an intelligent mind, someone that understood the power of the Sith and held respect for the Jedi. Not that Darth Bane worshipped them, but he understood the threat that they posed to the Sith plan. Yoda, of course, never met Bane personally, but he studied the Sith enough to know about the last of them. Is it impossible for Bane to create a lineage in his name? Yaddle didn't necessarily disagree, yet there was a line and he was about to cross it. Sifo understood. It wasn't reasonable to spout the idea of the Sith off to anybody or everybody, especially not the likes of the Council. She suggested that he keep this quiet and do more digging. If she could be of any assistance, she would provide it. Perhaps he would lay off the whole imaginative style of approach to situations for the time being. Sifo-Dyas again understood. His positions hadn't exactly been popular, and his closeness with Dooku was sometimes troublesome. However, the Jedi respected him because he believed in the path, with trust in the Council. His imagination just proved to be frustrating sometimes. Yaddle didn't want to reject his vision. She also couldn't support it either. Not yet, at least. This conversation would be the only time that Sifo-Dyas would speak about this vision to anybody. He considered telling some of his closer friends about it, like Dooku or Qui-Gon, but they were both off-world and he had forgotten. They were elsewhere in the galaxy, serving the people of the Republic. Sifo wasn't worried about telling his vision to everyone because, truthfully, not everything needed to be shared. He instead kept his thoughts to himself and stayed away from major conversations. This didn't mean avoiding the Council, but he meditated more, spent meaningful time inside the garden, reading in the archives, and taking in perspectives that he may have been blind to before. Sifo-Dyas recognized one reality about this Chosen One individual. He or she could be the life of the Jedi or the end of the universe. Their very involvement in this galaxy changed everything. No longer could Sifo maintain his own hubris. The idea that Dooku had been passing around about changing the order for the better and fixing up the old problems seen with the Republic faded from Sifo-Dyas' mind. Sifo also came to the conclusion that the galaxy did not need a new army or military. That line of thinking was dangerous, and by raising a military of his own for the Jedi Order would only sow more violence into the galaxy. In the scenario where Sifo-Dyas had a vision of the Clone Wars, he would have seen it necessary to create a military. The threat of war was still real in this scenario, but instead of believing that a ground army could solve all of those problems, he believed that one individual needed to be dealt with. Whether the Chosen One should be killed, shipped off to a barren world, or trained with close instruction, he did not know. Yet there was something else plaguing his mind. The Sith were connected back to this in some form. Whichever that was, he wanted to find out, and that started with Dooku, of all people. Sifo-Dyas and Dooku grew up together. Both men were 66 years old, and had a lifetime of memories to share with the other. Dooku had moved on to more political roles with his home world, and was rather separated from the Jedi Order. But some of these radical shifts from his friend came from an outside source. The two of them shared very similar beliefs about the High Council and its service to the Republic. But Sifo, like Qui-Gon, believed in the concept of the Jedi Order. He understood that flaws existed within the system, and that they had to be the ones to make sure change could be brought to the structure. But Dooku was quitting on it, believing that nothing would be changed, and by doing nothing himself, was ensuring that he was right. This was often the disconnect that left Sifo worried about his friends, Qui-Gon and Dooku. Master Jin would never go as far as to leave the Jedi Order or consider it. He believed wholly in what a Jedi could be, and what they meant to the people of the galaxy. It was a massive cosmos, and the Jedi were an anchor for so many. Dooku, though, resorted to violent tendencies, as accounted for by Qui-Gon himself. Master Dooku avoided certain discussions with the High Council, believing that change could not be made, and he often found himself with bankers, oligarchs, and senators, the people that were the very problem in the galaxy. Sifo-Dyas loved Dooku with all of his heart, but he recognized that the certain hypocrisy seemed to drive Dooku into some of his actions. Instead of seeing that he might make the wrong choices or be going too far with any one thing, Dooku firmed his ground, demanding that he had to be right and that the council had gone too far yet again. It was a bubbling problem that ate away the foundation of their relationship. The vision Sifo-Dyas had would forever determine how he reacted to Dooku from here on out. Without the Clone War vision, Sifo wasn't running to Dooku in hopes to save the galaxy from war by creating an army. He was afraid to speak of what he saw. Entire star systems were ripped out of the sky by green and red lasers. People suffered in slavery with an imperial banner. No military could just stop that. Not that the Jedi could either, but whatever this chosen one was, needed to be found and either saved or destroyed. That was a deeply philosophical conversation that Sifo wasn't sure Dooku could handle in his headspace. But what Dooku could handle was a discussion about the rising darkness. Even if the Sith hadn't returned from the Millennium of Silence, there was one truth that Sifo-Dyas believed was irrefutable: darkness was rising. If not the Sith, then the fall of the Republic, or the creation of unstoppable monopolies. Dooku was in line with them, and so Master Dyas set for a meeting to transpire between himself and his longtime friend. Before that could happen, though, many members of the council noticed the change within Sifo-Dyas. He was usually the outspoken member of their chamber that disagreed with their actions. It's honestly why they chose him for their ranks. The three of them were each given a choice, to be honest. Dooku, Qui-Gon, and Sifo-Dyas were all asked to join the ranks of the High Council. Dooku refused because he believed they were corrupt, and Qui-Gon didn't believe he was ready for that. Two very different approaches, from two Jedi that felt similarly about the collection of elders. Sifo-Dyas never spoke out to trouble the council. He wanted the best for everyone, but sometimes, even in his old age, it could come off as reckless or just be that. One of his greatest examples of foolishness was his idealistic recruitment tactics that split families up, even if it wasn't something that should be done. The Jedi went into situations with the intention to uplift individuals. Sifo-Dyas was one of the few masters who plucked potential Jedi candidates from situations they shouldn't be removed from. It would create future problems on Quen, but that's why the council noticed the change. They may have not known about Sifo's recruitment fallacies or some of his other mistakes yet, but they did notice his demeanor. He took a position more similar to Plo Koon. He was quiet and didn't say much, simply observing or meditating. No one could really tell. It was Master Windu who first brought this up, to Yoda, then to Yariel Poof. Mace was concerned for their friend. He seemed on edge. Thus, before Sifo-Dyas could confront Dooku about his dealings with the corporate elite, he had to sit down with the Master of the Order, Mace Windu. This conversation wasn't one that Mace forced onto him. Sifo was well old enough to know that he was able to reject these types of meetings, but he wanted to see what Master Windu wanted. When the topic of his emotions or mental health came up, Sifo was surprised. Despite being cold on the surface and politically calculated, Master Windu cared deeply for those around him. This was quite endearing for Sifo-Dyas, and even though he wasn't required to be here, he was forced to make a decision. If, or if not, he would tell Windu about his visions. The concern from the Master of the Order was legitimate. Sifo could hear it in Mace's voice. As a result, he revealed the nature of his visions. It had by this point been well over 3 weeks since the first vision occurred. Sifo-Dyas had about 2 other visions and several other dreams revolving around the same topic in the meantime. He spoke about these revelations, and he watched the Master of the Order digest every detail given. Sifo-Dyas went further into his explanation than he ever did with Master Yaddle. He of course had more time to develop feelings and interpretations of these events since that anyways. The fact that they kept compiling on top of one another just made the challenge of living with them more difficult. Sifo-Dyas also explained that he had spoken to Master Jocasta about these visions, and she was helpful. He didn't exactly tell her what they were, but more so the broad concept. Master Jocasta knew, pointed him in the direction of useful holocrons for this type of thing, which Sifo used, but he didn't feel any relief from. It actually led to more dreams about this Chosen One or Sithari. Master Windu asked if Sifo ever saw a face of this phantom figure, and the answer was no. Master Dyas did not know what he was dealing with, because the Chosen One was simply an illusion. It appeared like a translucent shadow, a figure that could be anything or anyone. It could be a man or a woman, a Rhodian or a human. He did not know. There were thousands of star systems in the galaxy, millions of planets with citizens on them, and no answer to this Chosen One with any of that. He asked Master Windu what he should do about it. These visions had a history of becoming reality. Mace knew that, and so did Sifo. Since this would inevitably face them, Master Windu told Sifo-Dyas that he would give him the chance to rally together 100 Jedi, and send them across the galaxy in search of this individual. These should be missions that align with already in need people, so that not only would they be searching for the Chosen One, but helping those in need at the same time. Mace wasn't typically one to go down a rabbit hole that Sifo inspired, but the prophecy was one of the most important pieces of Jedi lore. If Master Dyas was struggling this badly, as he clearly was, this, in Mace's mind, was a realistic threat. Plus, this would be searching for a singular individual, not creating a grand army of the Republic. Following this, Sifo-Dyas' conversation with Dooku would be much less productive, even by Sifo standards. It was one of those discussions that led to Dooku getting flustered early on, and it only got worse from there. Instead of listening, his friend became obsessed with the idea of finding this individual. It was going to start with the darkness rising, but it just became about the Chosen One. A mystical individual that could break the Force or balance it? By this point, beyond Sifo-Dyas' knowledge, his longtime friend was already corresponding with the Sith. Dooku wasn't ready to completely abandon the Jedi Order, but he no longer believed in their ability to aid the galaxy. A hope for a great reset was filling his mind, and only encouraged by Hago Damask and Senator Palpatine. The promise of a Chosen One pushed him further, believing that through his new, powerful allies, that he would have the ability to free the galaxy from the oppression of the Republic and the negligence of the Jedi Order. He didn't tell this openly to Sifo-Dyas, but he suggested that he not take Windu at face value. There were disagreements Sifo and Dooku had about a lot of things. The promise of a Chosen One pushed him further, believing that through his new and powerful allies, that he would have the ability to free the galaxy from the oppression of the Republic and the negligence of the Jedi. He didn't openly tell this to Sifo-Dyas, he just suggested that he not take Windu at face value. There were disagreements Sifo and Dooku had about a lot of things, but Master Dyas was willing to give Mace the benefit of the doubt here, something that Dooku clearly shared no interest in doing. It was demoralizing as a conversation, one that forced Sifo-Dyas to question Dooku's true intentions and loyalties. He was usually one to maintain his composure. This, though, turned him into something different. Dooku would report on his findings to the Sith, and Sifo-Dyas would inform Master Yoda about this outburst, suggesting that they keep an eye on Dooku's contacts. The Grand Master rejected this, and so, as he always did, Sifo-Dyas went against Yoda's suggestion. 5 of the 100 Jedi sent to search for the Chosen One were assigned to keeping an eye on Dooku, and whoever he interacted with. 4 years of searching would yield little results. The tension started between Dooku and Sifo-Dyas had split them up, and instead of picking up with the Jedi and what they didn't find, this continues with Plagueis. The Sith Lord, known as the powerful banker of Megiddo, was being trailed quietly by the Jedi. As an expert pilot, he sought to avoid them and escape into the city of Coruscant. It was well known by the Sith that Dooku had caused trouble for them, and to prove his loyalty, he fully separated himself from the Jedi Order. Though there was no murder of Master Yaddle. Instead, he killed 2 knights, ones that were keeping their eyes on Palpatine. This resulted in the High Council becoming more alert, but Dooku, nor the idea of the Sith, ever found relevance inside their chambers. Plagueis sped his ship away from the pursuing Jedi, and in an effort to avoid them, slipped into an overpass. The Jedi picked up pace, and as Plagueis was watching his back, a drunk flyer slammed into his vessel. It didn't really help that Hego was flying recklessly, speeding, and also in the middle of the 2 lanes. The fire consumed the Sith Lord, killing him in an instant, an explosion of 2 vessels colliding on impact at high speed. The trailing Jedi quickly fled the scene, avoiding responsibility for the pileup and the several deaths they caused. When the media covered it, they sensed no foul play, mostly because they assumed it was similar to another incident where a royal was chased into an overpass by the tabloids, resulting in her death. Because Hego was out of the picture, the Jedi didn't really know who to keep an eye on aside from Palpatine. Clearly he was connected to something, but they didn't have proof anymore. No one on the council learned about the Jedi Knights causing Hego to die. They kept that a secret until they died. Instead, the council returned to what information they did have. Dooku frequently interacted with Hego and several other important bankers, but that didn't change the fact that the council was becoming frustrated with Sifo-Dyas. Aside from the 2 Jedi killed by Dooku and some other minor pieces of interest, this investigation had cost the Jedi heavily for the last 4 years. They were doing good in the galaxy, but there was the coming blockade over Naboo, and Sifo-Dyas was coming home from a month-long suspension after the council learned about his recruitment tactics, and the prophesized Chosen One didn't exist. If that individual did, they weren't found by anyone. Even though no one knew how related the Order was to Hego's death, the Jedi pulled away from the Chosen One's search. Sifo-Dyas would be greatly hurt by this decision from the Council without his presence, but it was the right choice. They weren't getting anywhere, and regardless of what visions or dreams he had, nothing changed. There wasn't any identity. Sure, he saw some sand planets, but thousands of systems had versions of sand on them. It wasn't a rare type of black sand like on Naboo. Inside of the Sith ranks, Dooku officially became Palpatine's apprentice, and he continued to work on seducing Sifo-Dyas. He didn't try it with Qui-Gon yet, because Dooku didn't want Obi-Wan. That wasn't a Jedi of value to Sidious. Maul and Dooku were. Qui-Gon could be useful, but he wasn't dedicated to it. Palpatine planned more on using the current Jedi instructor as a key to breaking Dooku anyways, but that remained the one problem for the Sith. Due to Dooku leaving the Jedi Order earlier and becoming Palpatine's student, Sifo-Dyas was less inclined to go to Kamino with Dooku. It was removed from the archives anyways, but Sifo had no need to build a grand army, regardless of what he saw in his visions, and especially not after his suspension. The Jedi Master believed that right could be done if they found the right person. Dooku was ordered to have at least one Jedi come to Kamino and put the order in for the clone army, but no one would. Qui-Gon was busy with Obi-Wan and currently being sent to Naboo to stop the blockade. Sifo-Dyas was both in a suspension and focused on the Chosen One, and really, no other Jedi trusted Dooku anymore. It left Sidious frustrated, so he turned his attention to the blockade over Naboo and his coming bid for chancellorship. Tyrannus would be sent to Kamino to create the clone army himself as a Jedi. He would take the fall, and someone else would rise as the Separatist leader. It was all a calculation to Sidious. He would use Tyrannus for the clone army and the Separatist unification, but prop Newt Gunray or someone else up as the de facto leader. Maul was heading to Naboo, and as long as he followed the correct orders and won, then the 2 of them would remain as master and apprentice, with Tyrannus becoming the odd man out after completing what Sidious needed. While Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were dealing with the Naboo crisis and eventually meeting the actual Chosen One on Tatooine, Sifo-Dyas returned to the Council. He and Master Yaddle reviewed the little crumbs of information that returned in his absence. A temporary seat held reign over Sifo's spot on the Council while he was away. The punishment or suspension that he faced kept him in a state of deep meditation for most of the period. It was like a forced or requested Barash vow, without leaving the temple grounds. In it, Sifo understood that his recruitment tactics had gone too far, and he was making too many mistakes. His focus should have been on the more beneficial thing for individuals, not for the Jedi. The whole thing bubbled over at Quinn in the past year, but it was over and done with now. Yaddle told Sifo-Dyas that she believed the information they had gathered didn't change a whole lot. With Hego Damask now dead, any leads to whatever Dooku wanted were pretty much off the table. Since there hadn't been a vote of no confidence yet, the Jedi weren't willing to paint Sheev Palpatine as a villain here. Sifo was trailing 2 dead paths out of all of them. Dooku was simply someone who moved on from the Jedi path, and he wasn't technically a traitor because of it. The Chosen One, though, was something to be optimistic for, but never really led to anything else until now. As Sifo-Dyas and Yaddle were going over the documents, Master Plo Koon walked into the room. He didn't expect anyone to be in, but he looked to each of them and bowed. Sifo continued reading through things as Yaddle caught Plo up to what they were talking about. Master Dyas stopped and asked what the report from the gala was 2 years ago. Yaddle asked for specifics, and Sifo responded with, "The Gala for Righteous Business Practices." A little on the nose, but this was one of those events that oligarchs went to when they donated a certain amount of credits to a specific fund in their name. Basically, they got profit and didn't pay taxes as a result. Special. There were some clips taken from the security footage at that gala, though. Senator Palpatine and Lot out of the Federation seemed very close to one another. Plo from the other side of the room clasped his hands, admitting that Representative Dodd joined the caucus that Palpatine headed on intergalactic commerce, and based on other public records, the TF PAC or Federation PAC donated heavily to the Palpatine campaign 3 years before. It was for one of Sheev's various terms as senator. Yaddle shook her head when she saw the realization cross Sifo-Dyas' face. She almost got the words out, but he immediately suggested that Palpatine could be working with the Federation. Plo took a deep breath and begged the question as Yaddle pursed her lips in annoyance. She really wanted to help him out, and she tried patience, but this was getting out of hand. Sifo held up his hands, telling the two of them that he knew it sounded weird, but think of it like this. A senator with a powerful position inside the Intergalactic Commerce Commission, with donations from the TF PAC and close ties to Representative Dodd, could see profit for himself in a blockade. Not only would the Federation give him more credits for supporting them, but he could make a bid for power in Valorum's apparent weakness. Plo looked to Yaddle, then to Sifo-Dyas. If that were the case, then how exactly could they prove it? Sifo shrugged. Easy. Tell the senator they had information that could bury the Chancellor. It could be framed as secrets about Valorum that could hurt his political image, and as a result, help Sheev free his home world from the Trade Federation with stronger leadership. Plo raised a finger before setting it down on his lap, and recognizing that maybe Sifo-Dyas was onto something. However, they couldn't just capture a sitting senator and hope to change things. That would get messy really quickly. Of course, Sifo had a counter idea, but that would be disrupted when a communication came through. Qui-Gon was returning from Tatooine with urgent news. During the following discussion, which involved learning about the Chosen One, imagined in Sifo-Dyas' vision, and the Sith attack on Tatooine, there'd be a major change. Obi-Wan would remain on Coruscant, with Anakin by his side. Obviously, this would come once it was decided that Queen Amidala would return to Naboo. The major event that would change would be prior to the announcement of the vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum. Qui-Gon personally thanked Sifo-Dyas for making it clear that there was a Chosen One in the galaxy. It made identifying young Skywalker much easier. As much as Sifo wanted to meet Anakin and speak to him privately, the Jedi were sending a message to Sheev Palpatine about dirt on the Supreme Chancellor. Palpatine wasn't stupid. so he didn't bite the bullet. He wouldn't get baited into something like that, and the Jedi were forced to come up with their own plan. However, with the Jedi breathing down his neck, and Padme seeing that nothing would get done, she demanded to leave Coruscant before she or Palpatine could ever speak to Valorum on the Senate floor, meaning that no one would call for a vote of no confidence against the Chancellor. Palpatine initially wanted her apprehended by the Trade Federation, so he could force her hand by a treaty and become Chancellor through Valorum's weakness. The vote of no confidence would have been easier in hindsight as a backup plan, but now it was becoming even more difficult. Sidious would be lying if he wasn't at least a little concerned about what the Jedi were doing behind his back. They were suspicious, and had been for a long 4 years. So quickly, as Qui-Gon and Sifo-Dyas left for Naboo, with Maul trailing behind them, Sidious forced Dooku to make a move to lure Yoda into a trap. He was hoping to make the Jedi fools of themselves for attempting to bait a sitting senator, but Yoda didn't bite the bait either. Instead, a counter plan created by Sifo-Dyas prior to his departure would be made. It involved making a sacrifice of the Chosen One. The Council highly condoned this, but they went with it for the sake of clarity. The only reason they agreed to it was because Sifo-Dyas' vision had been proven correct. Instead of baiting Palpatine into grabbing dirt on Valorum, they quote-unquote accidentally leaked a transmission to Dooku's frequency. It explained that the Chosen One and Jedi Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi were visiting the Umate Plaza. Sidious didn't want Dooku doing anything because he was too recognizable to the Order, and thus, the Sith Lord with cloaks over his head went in. The only reason Palpatine was at all interested was because one of the Jedi in this communication asked why they knew that Anakin was a Chosen One, and the midichlorian count was given back, hence why Palpatine wanted to be there himself. This was, in a way, a trust thing for Sidious. He didn't believe Dooku could be trusted with a retrieval mission. It was a fine line for the Sith Lord. Now that Plagueis was gone, he was trying to put everything into a position to favor him. Anakin and Obi-Wan were able to visit the plaza, so Anakin could get accustomed to the planet without worrying about battles he wasn't involved with. Sidious from afar watched the two Jedi walk around, grabbing off-world ice cream and speaking amongst themselves. Palpatine didn't chase them or pursue, he just kept his distance from within the crowd. Masters Windu, Plo, Balaba, and Mundi also kept their eyes on the crowd. With probe droids from the temple, they watched over the plaza and everyone within it, especially those hiding their identities. Sidious did not spot these drones, but he never made a move on the two of them. It'd be too risky. Unless, though, he waited until they left for their vessel. Palpatine couldn't give up the idea of taking in this powerful being and training him from such a young age. Across the stars on Naboo, Sifo-Dyas and Qui-Gon whipped their sabers across their torsos, protecting themselves from the Zabrak Sith Apprentice. Maul flipped away from the two Jedi Masters. With years of experience training together during Qui-Gon's formative years, they were well knowledgeable on the other's skill set, and they used that to keep Maul at a distance. The Sith Apprentice understood how difficult it would be to beat two Jedi Masters, but he played the patient game, drawing on their offense to lead them into the reactor chambers. Maul jabbed down on Sifo, who blocked the end of the saber staff into the ground, and he kicked his opponent backwards. Beside him, Qui-Gon dove in, powering down and losing his balance when Maul quickly shifted out of the way. Sifo-Dyas took advantage of the distraction, forcing Maul backwards and into a backflip to avoid falling down the reactor shaft. From afar, the Sith paced back and forth before making the leap to a catwalk in the middle of the chamber. Sifo helped Qui-Gon up and they both made a move to attack Maul. Once they landed on the adjacent catwalk, Sifo-Dyas was blocked and Qui-Gon parried. Maul spun around, kicking Sifo in the chest and charging the 70-year-old Jedi Master. Even in his old age, Sifo-Dyas was a very capable warrior. After shoving himself back to his feet and colliding with Maul, their weapons sizzled against each other, and Qui-Gon, in the position Obi-Wan would have been in, chased behind the two duelists. Maul understood what Sifo-Dyas was, and the relationship he had with Dooku. In his mind, defeating Sifo was equatable to defeating Dooku, and so this was personal to him. The Sith crushed down and Sifo's saber lodged into the edge of the catwalk, forcing him to push his hand upwards and grab Maul's saber staff. The young and aggressive adept tried to break the grip, but they were both simultaneously pushing Sifo's blade into the catwalk and fighting for control over the staff itself. Maul hissed in Sifo's face before the Jedi Master released his hand, forcing Maul to move with the flow to grip his saber before Sifo took it. As Maul swung back over his head, with all of his body weight pushing him elsewhere, Qui-Gon dragged his saber across Maul's calves, and he dropped to the ground. In space, the N1 starfighters would continue to struggle, eventually losing their battle to the Lucrehulk. Thankfully, the one saving grace for Naboo was the Jedi. Hundreds of Gungans died, while the rest were captured. Hundreds of guardsmen died in the streets, but the Jedi helped Queen Amidala capture Nute Gunray, after he bait and switched her inside the throne room. It would be Sifo-Dyas who saved the day, cutting through the droidekas and forcing the Federation battleship to surrender, because Nute was captured. Back on Coruscant, with the sun slipping behind the horizon, Obi-Wan and Anakin, still being hunted, returned to their starcraft so they could return to the temple. As they arrived, an individual presented himself, asking them if they could spare some change. Obi-Wan turned around, sensing something but not knowing what. As he prepared to reach for his saber, he was blasted with electricity and sent tumbling almost over the edge of the platform. Anakin cried out, but his arm was gripped by Palpatine's scaly hands. He shoved the former slave away, and just as he started moving, 4 sabers appeared around him, igniting, raising. As Sidious prepared to eviscerate the child so no one could have him, in response to the Jedi's hostility, Ki-Adi-Mundi placed a force-restricting cufflink on his wrist and snapped it against Palpatine's. Whatever happened here would happen to both of them. Sidious pulled a crimson saber out, accidentally cutting Skywalker across the face and sending him to the ground, to what the Jedi thought was death. Ki-Adi and Palpatine collided blades, as the Sith Lord attempted to remove one of their hands and escape. But the duel only lasted until Plo used Electric Judgment to subdue both of them. Mace would be by Anakin's side, to make sure he was alright, and he was. The result of this engagement would be Palpatine waking up in a pure white room, away from the core and from the Republic. The Jedi did not kill him nor Maul. They would find home on Stygeon Prime, and remain there for the rest of their days. They at some point would break free, but without any vessels to get off the structure or away from the planet, they would eventually be captured by a force sent by the High Council. Despite his wound, Anakin would make a full recovery and immediately begin training under Sifo-Dyas. It would be challenging to earn Anakin's trust, but Sifo would make it work, as Qui-Gon worked on finishing Obi-Wan's studies. Dooku would be a much different case. He would openly confront the Jedi Council, because he wanted to know what happened to Senator Palpatine. But Yoda would take Dooku to Naboo to see what he caused. The mass death from the battle and the blockade were all on Dooku's hands. He could have stopped it, and he was given the choice: surrender his weapon and his knowledge, or be sent to the Prism on Stygeon Prime. Dooku chose the former, and while the Jedi couldn't technically force it, they'd make sure he followed through with a brash vow. In this, Dooku would eventually find his peace and make amends with those he had wronged, especially the 2 Jedi he killed to protect the Sith. The blockade over Naboo would be troubling for the Republic, but without a vote of no confidence, Chancellor Valorum would fight back. He created the hyperspace taxation bill that the Federation responded to, and he would force the vote to ensure that they never did anything like it ever again. This coming motion from Valorum would lead to a series of new amendments that would openly punish big business, actively affecting the Jedi Order but eventually being made right in future bills and even amendments. Sifo-Dyas and Anakin would become the master and apprentice duo of the Jedi Order. The Council kept a close eye on it, but there was one thing the Council agreed on, in regard to Sifo. He was a very talented instructor, and his patience and even eventually fatherly presence in Anakin's life would help the Chosen One become the individual that would maintain balance in the galaxy. The Sith might be gone or locked away, but there were other threats always looming. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, without having to instruct Anakin, would make a case to the High Council that they should start a movement to the Outer Rim. It would be passed, and the final input of Valorum's tenure, assisted by a temporary use of the executive emergency powers he had, would be to assist the Jedi with this. Anakin adored his master, and he learned the proper way to manage his emotions, especially regarding Padme. This would eventually lead to him foregoing his attachments to her in search of something far more profound, a connection to the Jedi Order. Thanks to Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Sifo-Dyas, Anakin found an adoration for the sect of Force users, and he wished to be the best Jedi for all of them, not himself. He didn't believe himself to be all-powerful. Any attempt to do that would be snuffed out by Sifo-Dyas. While Qui-Gon would have made a fantastic instructor for Anakin, it would also be Sifo-Dyas that filled a fatherly role with the benefit of instructing Anakin in the way that he needed. The visions that started all of this would be seen by Sifo-Dyas as messages from the galaxy to never doubt the rise of darkness. That would be the lesson he took from it, and passed on to his peers inside the council. Like rebuilding their outpost at Quen before Naboo, Sifo-Dyas and Anakin would be responsible for several other temples, outposts, and learning academies growing following the Jedi-started slave revolutions of the Outer Rim. When Anakin became known as Master Skywalker, he would attribute everything he was to Sifo-Dyas and Qui-Gon Jinn. He and Obi-Wan were great friends, but if it weren't for the one who discovered him and the one who raised him, he'd be a different man. Master Skywalker would join Sifo-Dyas on the High Council, keeping a close eye on the dying Sith breed, and watch over the next golden era of Jedi and Republic relations. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about the story. Sifo-Dyas is a really fascinating character, and the story is his story. More than anything, the story has to be his story. If he started acting really irregularly for like 3 weeks, I think he'd be able to convince the Jedi to be like, yo, there's this thing out there, we need to search for it. How long that would go is debatable. I think they'd be pushing it at 4 years. I think he'd be really pushing his luck at that point, and that's why they stop. I think that the Jedi monitoring Dooku was a very interesting take, and I think it has to also come from Sifo-Dyas because they are best friends. You know, without Sifo-Dyas, the Jedi aren't investigating the Sith as they are. It's not just Hego and Palpatine, it's a bunch of people, but it eventually gets narrowed down because it is a 4-year investigation. But without that, you don't have, you know, Hego Damask or Plagueis getting killed in the Princess Diana style, and you also don't have that Palpatine getting lured in. I think Palpatine would be very frustrated in this scenario, and I don't think he's stupid enough to fall for the first call, but I think he would be interested enough to keep an eye on Anakin and Obi-Wan potentially stealing Anakin away from the Jedi at that one point, because, you know, that would be his chance to take the chosen one for himself. Overall, I really wanted like the unlikely heroes of this of the Star Wars universe be the heroes of this. Sifo-Dyas is in a way a villain. Like, he was like, oh, a war, how do I prevent a war? Create an army, that's gonna stop a war. Like, no, that's encouraging it actually, you know. And so I wanted these unlikely heroes to kind of be the catalyst for change, and I think Sifo-Dyas is that by seeing such jarring visions, and the visions he has are very similar to what, like, I believe Luke had in Last Jedi, where he goes into Ben's mind and he sees this crazy batshit insane stuff and he's like, oh, that's a problem. Except Sifo has to dwell on it for like 3 weeks and then another 4 years. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.